We tend to think of, oceans teeming with life or maybe dramatic thunderstorms when we talk about water.
Right. The big, obvious stuff.
Yeah. But what if I told you that something much closer, something we kind of walk on every day, soil, plays this absolutely vital and, well, surprisingly active role in the whole water story?
That's a fantastic way to put it. I mean, when you look at where all the Earth's water actually is, like
Mhm.
in that diagram, figure 6.1,
Mhm.
conceptually,
Okay.
the vast majority, yeah, it's oceans, ice caps, deep groundwater, huge reservoirs.
Right.
But the water that really keeps life going on land, the stuff we drink, that feeds our crops, that flows in rivers, that's a much, much smaller slice of the pie, and it's constantly moving.
And soil is right in the middle of that movement.
Exactly. It's central to that active cycle.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then, getting into this unsung hero soil. We want to understand, its critical part in the water cycle and how that ripples out, affecting everything from our food to the look of the land.
And we're drawing on some really interesting material that explores soil properties and specifically this interaction with water.
Great. So where do we start?
Well, the first big idea, I think, is seeing soil as this temporary storage tank, like a sponge, basically.
A soil sponge. I like that.
It's pretty incredible when you think about something like 65% of all the water that falls on land actually interacts with the soil.
65%.
Yeah, passes through it, gets held by it, almost two-thirds.
That really shifts the perspective. And this soil sponge idea, that's kind of shown in figure 6.3, right, with the watershed.
Precisely. That figure shows a watershed, an area draining to one point, and the water balance equation. See that SS?
Soil storage.
Yep. That's the water held in the soil sponge. And it directly influences D, the discharge, the stream flow coming out.
And also ET, which is...
Evapotranspiration.
Yeah.
Water going back to the atmosphere, partly evaporation from the soil surface, partly transpiration from plants.
Yeah, got it. And the San Francisco example there just shows how that stored soil water becomes a critical resource downstream.
Absolutely. How much water the soil holds doesn't just affect our water supply. It dictates how much runs off the surface versus how much gets to the plant roots. It's this balancing act, and the soil's the conductor.
And plants aren't just like passive bystanders here. They're actively involved.
Oh, definitely. Plants are like nature's pumps. Their roots pull water up from the soil, and then they release it as vapor through their leaves. That's transpiration. It's a huge part of that ET we mentioned.
Right. And the impact of that pumping action is really clear in figure 6.4, the clear-cutting study.
Yeah, that Appalachian catchment study is striking. They cut down the trees, and look what happens to the stream flow.
It skyrockets.
Totally. Fewer trees mean way less transpiration, so much more water just runs off. Plus, the soils there, those typic hapludults and distrocreps.
Okay.
They aren't great at holding water anyway, so without the trees drinking it up, the ground gets saturated faster, and off it goes.
And it's not just transpiration, right? Table 6.1 mentions interception too. Plants catching rain before it even hits the ground.
Exactly. A dense forest canopy can catch a surprising amount of rain, which just evaporates straight back into the air. So the type of vegetation matters a lot for how much water actually makes it into the soil sponge in the first place.
Okay, so if the rain does hit the ground, but it comes down too fast for the soil sponge to soak it up, what then? Runoff.
That's it. If rainfall intensity exceeds the soil's infiltration capacity, its ability to absorb water, it ponds on the surface and starts flowing downhill. Runoff.
And that leads to things like what's shown in figure 6.5, the prairie pothole.
Yeah, those little depressional wetlands, they form exactly where the soil doesn't let water soak in quickly, so just collects in these low spots.
Fascinating how soil dictates the landscape features. Farmers might see them as a hassle, right?
They can be, yeah, in terms of planting and harvesting. But ecologically, hugely important. That figure notes they're critical nesting sites for millions of ducks in North America.
So a nuisance in one context is vital in another.
It definitely makes you think about how we define useful land, doesn't it?
Okay, what about colder places? Freezing, snow, how does that play into it? Figure 6.6 looks at that.
Ah, yeah, the timing is really crucial there. It's all about whether the ground freezes before the snow piles up.
Okay, why does that matter?
Well, think of snow as an insulator. If the ground freezes solid first, that snow blanket keeps it frozen, like an impermeable cap, even when the air warms up in spring.
Ah, so the meltwater can't get in.
Right, it runs off the surface instead.
Yeah.
Big spring runoff. But if you get a good snow cover before the ground freezes hard, the soil underneath stays relatively unfrozen and permeable.
And the snowmelt can soak in better.
Exactly. So the soil's condition before the snow is key.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears to something more manicured. Lawns, golf courses, figure 6.7, turf grass runoff. Can grass really cause runoff?
You bet. You
Yeah.
think of grass helping infiltration, but yeah, under intense rain or if the soil is compacted or just overwatered,
Yeah.
you absolutely get runoff. And look at the comparison in that figure between the two golf grasses.
Right, the creeping bent grass had less runoff.
Yeah, because it had more thatch, that dead stuff at the bottom, and more biopores, those little channels from roots and worms. It just shows how much soil structure matters, even under turf.
And that runoff isn't just water, is it? The picture shows it carrying pollutants.
Definitely. Fertilizers, pesticides, they wash right off into streams or storm drains. And plants themselves can even direct water. Figure 6.8, stem flow.
Yes. Look at that corn plant diagram. The leaves and stalk act like a funnel, channeling rainwater right down to the base of the stem.
So it gets really wet right there.
Much wetter than the soil, just a little bit away. This can affect where nutrients leach, maybe wash them down faster if they're near the stem, and it can encourage water to find those fast routes, those macropores, into the soil.
Okay, so if we want more water to soak in, what can we actually do? Figure 6.9 shows some management examples. Yeah, the good news is we can manage soils to improve infiltration. Those furrow dikes in the Texas field.
Yeah.
Simple little ridges, but they hold rainwater back, give it time to soak in.
Clever.
And the other picture, soil under a cover crop. Look at all those earthworm burrows.
Wow, yeah, like little pipes.
Exactly. They're natural macropores, perfect pathways for water to enter easily. It's like boosting the soil's plumbing.
But then, sadly, we often do the opposite in cities, right? Figure 6.10, the urban impact.
Yeah, urbanization is usually bad news for soil permeability, construction work, heavy equipment. It just compacts the soil, squeezing out the pore space.
Right.
And often, the best part, the topsoil, the A horizon, with all the organic matter and good structure, gets scraped off or buried.
And the difference is significant, that New Zealand study.
Oh yeah, a 3 to 10-fold decrease in hydraulic conductivity, how easily water moves through when they converted pasture to housing. You know, all that natural variation, probably from earthworms in the pasture, gone, just uniformly poor infiltration.
And the results of that poor infiltration are pretty stark in figures 6.11 and 6.12, comparing urban and forested watersheds.
The hydrographs, those streamflow graphs, tell the whole story. Same rainfall. But the urban watershed has these huge, fast spikes in runoff.
Flashy, they call it.
Exactly. All those roofs, roads, parking lots, they're like expressways for rainwater straight into the streams. Leads to more flooding, less water soaking in to recharge groundwater, so streams run lower between rains.
And figure 6.1 shows the physical damage, right? Eroded banks.
Yeah, carved out channels, exposed pipes. It's tough on the streams. Forests, natural landscapes, they act like buffers, slowing the water down, letting it soak in.
But cities aren't doomed. Figure 6.13 shows some solutions. Permeable pavers, rain gardens.
Thankfully, no. We can engineer solutions. Permeable pavements let water soak through driveways or parking lots. Rain gardens are great, specially designed little depressions that catch runoff, hold it, let it filter in slowly.
And they look nice, too.
They do, often planted with native plants. Good for pollinators, adds green space. It's about trying to mimic nature's water handling, even in concrete jungles.
It really keeps coming back to soil structure, doesn't it? Figure 6.14 drives that home.
Absolutely fundamental. Tight, compacted soil, or bare soil, where raindrops blast the surface apart and create a seal. Water just runs off.
But open, stable soil.
Full of those aggregates and macropores. Water goes right in, and add vegetation cover on top. That protects the surface, adds organic matter. You can practically eliminate surface runoff sometimes.
And it's not just the surface. Figure 6.15 introduces things like fragipans, impermeable layers below the surface.
Right, these dense layers deep down act like a barrier. Water moving down hits the fragipan and stops, or moves sideways.
So the soil above it gets waterlogged?
Exactly. You get a perched water table sitting on top of that layer. When it rains more, the upper soil is already full, so water flows sideways above the fragipan or just runs off the surface.
And that significantly increases stream flow, like in that watershed comparison.
Dramatically. Something hidden underground completely changes how the landscape handles water.
Amazing. And it's not just the physical stuff, even the critters in the soil matter. Figure 6.16, ants and termites.
Yeah, the unsung heroes again. Especially in drier places, like that Australian study shows. Their tunnels and burrows create massive networks of macropores,
Letting water in.
dramatically increasing infiltration, They found when they kept insects out, infiltration dropped and wheat yields went down.
Wow. By how much?
Something like a 36% increase in wheat production just from having ants and termites doing their thing. It shows how vital they are for water availability to plants.
Incredible. Okay, so water gets in, moves around. Let's zoom out to this idea of the soil-plant atmosphere continuum. SPANC, figure 6.16.
Why? Saccadicry. It just emphasizes that water moves along this continuous pathway from soil into the plant roots, up the stem, out the leaves, into the atmosphere.
They're driven by.
Differences in water potential. Basically, water moves from wet areas to dry areas,
Yeah.
always downhill potential-wise.
And figure 6.17 also mentions hydraulic redistribution, roots moving water around.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Roots can actually pull water from deeper, wetter soil layers and release it into shallower, drier layers, usually at night.
Like the plant is watering itself or its neighbors.
Kind of, it's redistributing water within the soil profile. Pretty neat.
Very cool. Okay, let's focus on the atmosphere part of SPAC. Evaporation and transpiration. Figure 6.18 shows an evaporation pan for estimating potential evapotranspiration, PET.
Right. PE is the maximum potential water loss under ideal conditions if water supply isn't limiting. That Class A pan is a simple way to measure how much water evaporates from an open surface, integrating sunlight, wind, humidity. It gives you a baseline demand.
And figure 6.19 then breaks ET down into E, evaporation from soil, and T, transpiration from plants, comparing corn and forests.
Yeah, this shows how the balance shifts. Early in the season, with small corn plants, lots of bare soil, evaporation dominates.
Makes sense.
But as the corn grows and shades the ground, transpiration takes over. In a forest, though, with canopy cover and leaf litter year-round, transpiration is almost always the bigger player. Evaporation from the soil surface stays pretty low.
And plants compete for that soil water, right? Figure 6.20, the stressed soybeans near trees.
Oh yeah, tree roots can go deep and wide. They're often very good at sucking up available water, sometimes outcompeting crops like those soybeans planted nearby, especially when things get dry.
Okay, what about efficiency? Figure 6.21, water use efficiency, producing biomass per unit of water.
Generally, practices that boost crop, yield good fertilization, pest control, better varieties also tend to improve water use efficiency up to a point. You get more crop bang for each water buck, so to speak. The shaded area shows the typical range.
And plants have this daily cycle, figure 6.22a and b, taking water up, but also releasing some.
Yeah, during the day, transpiration is high, pulling water up. But at night, transpiration slows way down. Water potential inside the roots can actually become higher than in the surrounding soil, especially if the surface soil is drying out.
So water leaks back out.
A little bit, yeah. Exudation, figure 6.22b, shows those droplets on the cut stem at night. It can subtly re-wet the soil right around the roots.
And that leads to figure 6.23, hydraulic lift in action.
Exactly. This experiment shows a deep-rooted grass acting like a pump, pulling water from deep down, releasing it near the surface at night.
And helping the kale next door.
Yep, making water available to the shallower-rooted kale, reducing its water stress. It's like interplant irrigation, mediated by the soil.
That's wild. Okay, given all these ways water leaves the soil, how do we conserve it in farming? Figure 6.24, cover crops and no-till.
These are huge.
Yeah.
Leaving cover crop residue on the surface is like putting a mulch down.
Yeah.
Shades the soil, reduces evaporation, suppresses weeds that compete for water.
And no-till, not plowing.
Keeps the soil structure intact, preserves those earthworm channels and root pathways, helps water soak in, reduces runoff, and reduces evaporation compared to bare-tilled soil. The figure also shows mechanical weed control, important for organic systems using these methods.
What about fallowing? Leaving land bare to save water. Figure 6.25 questions that, at least in Colorado.
Yeah, the study's interesting. In that semi-arid climate, fallowing every other year didn't save much more water than fallowing less often. Why? Because so much water evaporated from the bare soil during the fallow period.
So the savings from not growing a crop were lost to evaporation.
Pretty much. It challenges the assumption that more fallow always means more stored water, at least there.
And the balance between liquid loss, runoff, and vapor loss, EP, really depends on climate. Figure 6.26 A and B.
Absolutely. Arid regions, little rain, sparse plants. Evaporation from the soil surface is a huge component of water loss. Potential ET is high too. That global map really highlights where soil moisture is the main thing limiting plant growth.
For some crops, farmers use plastic mulches. Figure 6.27.
Right. Very effective for weed control, obviously. And they definitely cut down on soil evaporation.
And the red mulch actually helps strawberries.
Apparently. Reflects where light backup stimulates growth. But the downside, as you see in the picture, is that impermeable plastic can increase runoff and erosion if you're not careful, especially on slopes.
So back to leaving residue. Conservation tillage, figure 6.28, that helps everywhere.
Pretty much. Leaving stalks and leaves on the surface, like in 6.28a and b, protects the soil from sun and rain impact, reduces evaporation, reduces erosion, big benefits in semi-arid areas, but also helps in humid regions. And Table 6.2 puts numbers on it, shows the actual soil water gains from straw mulch in the Great Plains.
And these practices pay off long-term. Figure 6.29, the sorghum study.
Yeah, that long-term data is powerful. Better soil management, conservation tillage, leads to higher yields over decades and increases the soil's water holding capacity. It builds resilience.
Okay, figure 6.30 pulls it together with seasonal water balance curves for different climates. Humid, semi-arid, irrigated arid.
Right, it shows the ebb and flow. Humid areas often have surplus water percolating down. Semi-arid relies heavily on stored soil water. Irrigated arid zones, completely dependent on adding water to meet the huge evaporative demand.
And figure 6.31 shows how that incoming water gets split, percolating down versus going back up as ET in those different zones.
Yeah, different climates partition water very differently.
Okay, let's follow that percolating water deeper. Groundwater. Figure 6.32 shows the vadose zone, water table.
Right, water trickles down through the unsaturated vadose zone until it hits the saturated zone, the water table. Then it flows sideways, slowly, feeding streams, or getting pumped out by wells, like in figure 6.33.
But figure 6.32 also flags the contamination risk. Landfills, spills. Box 6.2 mentions health impacts.
Huge issue. Groundwater moves slowly, so contamination can persist for a long time, and it's our drinking water source in many places. Very vulnerable.
And it's not always slow, uniform filtering. Figure 6.34 preferential flow.
Yeah, exactly. Cracks, old root channels, worm burrows. These can act like express lanes.
Wow.
Water and any contaminants in it can shoot down quickly, bypassing a lot of the soil filtering.
And table 6.3 shows heavy rain makes this worse, pushing pesticides down faster.
Yeah, high-intensity water application overwhelms the slow pathways and favors these fast tracks, more leaching potential.
And water tables aren't simple either. Figure 6.35, regional versus perched, epiarchic, endoarchic.
Right. You have the main regional water table, but you can also get these localized perched water tables sitting on top of less permeable layers, like those fragipans we talked about.
Okay.
Epiaquic soils get wet from the top down due to a perched table. Endoaquic soils get wet from the bottom up from the regional table. Important distinctions for drainage and land use.
Speaking of drainage, what about too much water? Figure 6.36 shows the benefits of draining wet soils.
Yeah, waterlogged soil means no oxygen for roots, bad for most plants. Drainage lowers the water table, improves aeration, lets roots grow deeper and healthier. That corn growth data in the figure is pretty clear.
And figures 6.37 and 38 show the main ways. Surface ditches versus subsurface tiles?
Yep. Surface drainage shapes the land to get water off quickly. Subsurface uses buried pipes, tiles, to lower the water table from below. Tiles are often preferred because they don't get in the way of farming.
Figure 6.39 shows water moving towards those tiles.
Exactly. Creates a gradient, pulling excess water out of the profile.
And these drainage principles apply to houses too. Figures 6.40, 6.41, keeping basements dry.
Absolutely. Same idea. Use gravel backfill, perforated pipes around the foundation to collect water and drain it away safely, prevent water pressure building up against the walls. Box 6.3 even mentions a topiary garden needing drainage.
And getting the installation right is critical. Figure 6.42.
Oh, definitely. Put those pipes in upside down with the holes facing up. Useless. Details matter.
Fascinating how it connects. And soil isn't just for drainage, it's for treatment too. Septic systems, figure 6.43.
Right. Soil is an amazing natural filter. Septic drain fields use the soil to treat wastewater. Physical filtering, chemical absorption, biological breakdown by microbes.
Table 6.4 lists the soil properties needed.
Yeah, things like permeability, depths to water table, slope.
Yeah.
All crucial. And the PERC test in figure 6.44 measures that permeability.
What if the soil isn't suitable? Figure 6.45, the mound system.
That's an alternative. You build an elevated sand mound to provide the necessary treatment zone above the poor natural soil or high water table.
Okay, shifting to water use overall. Figure 6.46, global consumption. Agriculture is the big one.
By far, irrigation dominates global water withdrawals. Table 6.5 defines some key terms here too.
It really highlights the pressure on water for food production.
Enormous pressure, and it makes irrigation efficiency incredibly important.
Which brings us to figure 6.47 onwards, irrigation methods and losses. Figure 6.47 shows leaky ditches.
Yeah, traditional unlined canals can lose a lot of water just seeping out before it even gets to the field. Figure 6.48 tries to average out these losses, significant amounts lost in storage and transport.
And table 6.6 summarizes the main irrigation types.
Surface, sprinkler, and micro irrigation, each with pros and cons.
Surface irrigation, like in figure 6.49, can be uneven.
Often, yeah. Hard to get water distributed perfectly across a whole field just by flooding it. Too much at one end, not enough at the other, plus runoff.
Figure 6.50 shows a more controlled version, level basins.
Right. Helps get more uniform coverage in surface irrigation.
Then sprinklers. Figure 6.51, the classic center pivot, can do fertigation too.
Yep, very common. Allows applying fertilizer with the water fertigation. More control than surface flooding.
And figure 6.52 shows precision sprinklers, varying water based on soil.
Now we're getting sophisticated. Using soil maps, GPS, apply more water where the soil holds less, less water where it holds more. Really targeting the application.
And finally, microirrigation, drip or trickle, figure 6.53.
Super efficient. Delivers water slowly, right to the plant roots through emitters. Minimizes evaporation, minimizes runoff, can even reduce weed growth because you're only wetting a small area.
And table 6.7 shows the efficiency gains. Big difference in Texas.
Huge difference. Microirrigation is way more efficient than traditional surface methods, saving enormous amounts of water. Critical for sustainability.
Wow. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. What's the main takeaway from this deep dive?
I think it's that soil isn't just a passive stage for water. It's an active, crucial player. It dictates so much: infiltration, runoff, storage, plant uptake, groundwater recharge, even how we treat waste. It's deeply interconnected.
Yeah, it's far more dynamic than just dirt.
Absolutely. The aha, for me, is always realizing how much soil properties and, importantly, how we manage the soil directly control water's fate. It's often invisible, but it's fundamental to healthy ecosystems and, frankly, sustainable living.
Right. So a final thought for everyone listening.
Hmm.
Maybe next time it rains or you walk across a field or park, think about the ground beneath your feet. How is that specific soil influencing the water around you? What does that mean for local streams or your garden or the wider environment in your community?
And maybe even what small changes could make a difference. Could better lawn care or community rain gardens help manage water better right where you are?
It really does start with understanding that deep, vital link between soil and water.
Couldn't agree more.